That winter in Chicago brought biting winds blowing from Lake Michigan. But inside the Crystal Hall of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, the atmosphere was burning hot with camera flashes and resounding applause. Elias Vance, 29 years old, donning a hand-tailored Italian tuxedo, took long, confident strides onto the podium of glory. The golden plaque engraved with the words Tech Entrepreneur of the Year reflected a sparkling light into his ambitious eyes. At an age not yet past 30, Elias had successfully built a software empire worth tens of millions of dollars. He looked down at the auditorium, where hundreds of brilliant minds from Silicon Valley and the elite were directing their admiring gazes toward him. However, Elias' eyes unconsciously stopped at the first row. The VIP seat bearing the nameplate Arthur Vance was completely empty. A familiar pang twisted in Elias' chest, but he quickly hid it beneath a perfect, industrial smile. He adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "People often ask me," Elias' voice rang out, warm and decisive, "what is the secret to rising from empty hands? How could a kid growing up from the slums of South Chicago stand here today?" The entire auditorium fell dead silent in anticipation. "The truth is," Elias smirked, his eyes growing a beat colder, "you have to learn how to walk on your own when no one reaches out a hand to catch you. You must get used to loneliness. I stand here today, not thanks to privilege, not thanks to a perfect family launchpad, and certainly not thanks to the support of anyone bearing the title of blood relative. I stand here because I built everything myself, from the very shattered pieces of abandonment." A thunderous round of applause erupted. Investors nodded in appreciation of the resilience of a young CEO rising from hardship. But deep inside, Elias knew well that speech was not meant to inspire. It was a stab, a public condemnation he reserved for his absent father. In Elias' memory, Arthur Vance was never a true father. He was just a lowly, sullen mechanic, always reeking of grease and sweat, and always absent from every important milestone of his life. He was absent from his high school graduation. He used the excuse of having to work the night shift when Elias received his master's degree. And worst of all, the pain Elias would never forgive. He did not show up at his wedding 3 years ago. The day his mother passed away from a severe illness, Arthur did not even shed a single tear, just silently signed the papers and returned to his cramped auto garage, ignoring Elias' screaming in despair. The arrogance of a successful man made Elias believe that he had risen despite his father's awfulness, not because of him. 3 days after the awards night, in the tempered glass office, reigning on the 40th floor of the Central Tower in Chicago, Elias was giving a presentation to venture capital representatives when his secretary hesitantly walked in. "Director Vance, there is a man claiming to be your father waiting in the lobby. Security was about to escort him out because he has no appointment and..." The secretary lowered her voice. "He doesn't look very appropriate." Elias' face hardened. He excused himself to the partners and strode out to the outer lobby. Arthur Vance stood there, swallowed up amidst the lavish space of marble and transparent glass. He wore a khaki jacket frayed at the elbows, his work boots covered in mud and motor oil. His rough, cracked hands were tightly clutching a carefully wrapped small wooden box. His appearance was in complete contrast to the glamorous world Elias had strived his whole life to enter. That disparity made Elias feel humiliated. "What are you doing here?" Elias growled, quickly pulling Arthur into a small soundproof meeting room to avoid the curious stares of the employees. "Next week is your 30th birthday." Arthur cleared his throat, trying to force a stiff smile. His face was deeply etched with the wrinkles of extreme exhaustion. "I found your grandfather's old pocket watch. It took me months to manually machine the gears and fix it. I thought you would like it." "A watch?" Elias interrupted, laughing bitterly. He raised his left wrist, revealing a $50,000 Rolex. You think I need your rusty watch? Or do you think an old item can make up for the 20 years you abandoned my mother and me? Arthur froze, the smile on his lips dying out. The wooden box in his hands trembled slightly. Elias, I know I wasn't a good father. I just wanted to come to congratulate you on your award. I read the newspaper. Don't mention that award. Elias exploded, the repression of many years shattering. What right do you have to be proud? The right of a man who threw away his wife when she was sick. The right of a father who didn't even bother to show up on his son's wedding day because he was busy fixing cars for others. You don't understand, Elias. Arthur spoke with difficulty, his cloudy eyes looking down. Things are not what you think. I understand perfectly well. Elias took a step forward, pressing his father into the corner of the wall, each word as sharp as a razor, aimed straight at the older man's heart. You are a coward. You loved your torn-up garage more than this family. You let my mother die in loneliness. Do you know how much I once yearned to have a father? But not anymore. I don't need you anymore. Your poverty and your silence make me sick. The room fell into a deadly silence. There was only the sound of Elias' heavy breathing from anger. He waited for Arthur to react, to get angry, or at least to make an excuse. But no. Like every time, Arthur chose silence. A silent power so profound it was cruel. He didn't refute a single word. His old shoulders slumped. He carefully placed the wooden box on the glass table. I'm sorry, Arthur whispered, his voice raspy as if being choked. I will never bother your life again. He turned his back, slowly walking out the glass door, leaving dirty shoe prints on the polished floor. Elias stood there, his chest heaving. He pulled out his phone, blocking Arthur's number immediately. Then, he picked up the wooden box on the table, tossing it straight into the trash can without bothering to open it to look. Elias believed that he had just severed the final tumor in his life. He returned to the meeting room with the investors, smiling confidently as if nothing had happened. Little did he know, that discarded box did not just contain a watch, but contained an entire lifetime of a person who had drained himself dry for him. And that cruel curse that day would become a sentence of conscience haunting him until his very last breath. Below is part 2 of the story. This part will focus on the event that unravels the truth, pushing the plot to its climax and beginning Elias' journey of torment, as he realizes his entire proud world was built on his father's blood and tears. 6 months after the brief and cruel encounter, in the Ritz-Carlton lobby, Elias Vance's career reached a pinnacle that every tech entrepreneur coveted. His software company was entering the final rounds of negotiation to merge with a giant tech conglomerate, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Elias was standing on top of the world, having completely forgotten the man in the frayed khaki jacket that day. Until a Tuesday afternoon, while signing crucial legal documents, Elias' phone rang. The words Cook County General Hospital flashed on the screen. It was a public hospital in the poorest suburban area of Chicago. May I ask if this is Mr. Elias Vance? We are calling from the emergency room. Patient Arthur Vance was just brought here after an acute myocardial infarction. His condition is very critical. A cold draft ran down Elias' spine, but his pride and cold shell instantly pulled him back. He excused himself from the meeting room, striding out into the hallway. I'm listening. How is his condition? He is in a deep coma. Our cardiology specialist says he needs surgery to place a stent and possibly a bypass tonight. But the patient has no health insurance, and we need a family member to sign the risk consent form, as well as his old medical records. I will be right there. Elias hung up, frowning in annoyance. Even when he is about to die, He still knows how to bother my perfect life, Elias thought bitterly to himself. 30 minutes later, Elias' glossy black Porsche Panamera tore through the wind, rushing into the dilapidated parking lot of Cook County Hospital. He walked into the waiting room filled with the smell of antiseptic and cramped conditions. When the head doctor stepped out with a serious face, Elias immediately pulled out his black card and threw it onto the reception desk. Use the best equipment, hire the best surgeon. Send all the bills to me, Elias said in a commanding voice. As for the old medical records, where do I get them? In his wallet, there is a bunch of keys and a piece of paper with an address. You need to go there to see if there is an old medical book or a list of medications he is taking. This is very important to avoid anaphylactic shock during surgery. Elias took the piece of paper. When glancing at the address line, his eyebrows furrowed. It was not the single-story house in the suburbs where he lived as a child. It was the address of a trailer park nestled near an abandoned industrial zone on the edge of the city, a place meant for those at the bottom of society. Did he blow all the money from selling the house on gambling or drinking? Elias muttered a curse while heading back to his car. When Elias parked his polished Porsche in front of the muddy lot of the trailer park, curious and timid eyes from the surrounding poor laborers focused on him. Elias pinched his nose, squeezing past stagnant puddles to reach trailer number 42. It was dilapidated, rusty, and looked like it could collapse at any moment. He inserted the worn-out key into the lock. The door creaked open. The air inside was stifling and freezing. There was no heating system. The interior consisted only of an old mattress laid on the floor, a mini gas stove caked with grease, and boxes of instant noodles stacked in the corner. There was no television. There was not a single valuable piece of furniture. Elias stood frozen. His initial anger suddenly gave way to a feeling of extreme bewilderment. Arthur used to own a rather prosperous auto repair garage. Why was he living like a homeless man like this? Elias' judgment told him that his father had fallen into some vice. He resentfully flipped through the cardboard boxes under the bed to find the medical book. An army green iron box, locked with a tarnished brass padlock, fell out from under the thin blanket. Its weight was quite heavy. Unable to find the key, impatience and frustration led Elias to grab the rusty wrench on the table, smashing it hard against the lock. Clang! The lock snapped open. The lid popped up. Elias had prepared himself mentally to see loan shark debt papers or casino receipts, but no. Inside were neatly folded stacks of papers, wrapped in moisture-proof plastic bags. Elias picked up the top paper. It was a bank transfer receipt, its red stamp faded by time. His eyes skimmed over the faint dot matrix text. Date 8/15/2015. Sender Arthur Vance. Recipient Stanford University Transfer Scholarship Fund. Note: Semester 1 tuition for student Elias Vance. Elias' heart felt like someone was squeezing it. His hands trembled as he flipped to the papers underneath. Sophomore year dorm fees. Hospital bills when he broke his arm in a football game. The money to buy the first specialized laptop for software engineering. Throughout Elias' entire college life, he was always proud and grateful to have won a full scholarship from an anonymous charity fund. He used to flaunt to the press that he didn't spend a dime of his family's money to get into an Ivy League school. It turned out that anonymous fund bore the name of his sullen, always absent father. He had sent every single spare cent he earned into it. But the biggest shock had not yet stopped. At the bottom of the iron box was a thick stack of legal documents. Elias' hands were freezing cold when he pulled it out. It was a contract transferring land use rights and business assets. Arthur Vance had sold off the family's only home and the auto garage that was his life's devotion. Tucked inside the contract was a confirmation letter from Vanguard Venture Capital. The content of the letter completely crushed the young CEO's last bit of pride, confirming the receipt of $150,000 from Mr. Arthur Vance. As per your strict confidentiality request, we will transfer this amount as an anonymous angel investment to inject emergency bailout capital into Elias Vance's startup company. The date on the letter matched exactly with the time 6 years ago. Back then, Elias' startup was about to declare bankruptcy, and he was so desperate he was contemplating suicide. Then suddenly, an angel investor appeared, pumping in exactly $150,000 to salvage everything, creating the momentum for his tens of millions-dollar empire today. Elias staggered, his knees turning to jelly, and he collapsed onto the filthy floor of the trailer. The air in his chest felt drained. The Rolex watch on his wrist felt incredibly heavy. The thousands of dollars suit he was wearing suddenly became a cheap clown outfit. He, the man who always patted his chest claiming to have risen from empty hands, the man who had shunned his father in the middle of a lavish hotel lobby, the man who had thrown his birthday gift into the trash, was actually a man living on the blood, sweat, and deprivation of the rest of his father's life. No, it can't be. Elias held his head, hot tears welling up, falling profusely onto the crumpled receipts. The arrogance vanished, leaving only a horrifying remorse tearing at his soul. He's dying. A thought flashed through Elias' mind like a bolt of lightning. And the last time I saw him, I called him trash. Elias hastily grabbed all the papers, rushing out of the trailer like a madman. He slammed the gas pedal of the Porsche to the floor, ignoring the red lights at intersections, screaming inside the enclosed car. He had to get back to the hospital. He had to apologize. He had to tell Arthur that he knew everything. But when Elias burst through the doors of the intensive care unit, ICU, the piercing beep-beep sound of the heart monitor was ringing frantically. Doctors and nurses were surrounding Arthur's bed, frantically performing chest compressions. Elias stood paralyzed at the threshold, watching his father's frail body bounce up after each defibrillator shock, while his soul seemed to be gradually slipping out of his hands, taking with it the very last chance for redemption. Below is part 3 of the story. This time, the perspective shifts to the father, Arthur Vance, who is sinking into a deep coma, where he hears all of his son's torment. The most heartbreaking secret about the mother will also be revealed in this darkness, along with a childhood memory that brings him back from the dead. I am sinking. Surrounding me is a thick, freezing, weightless fog. There is no light, no shape, only a steady, soulless beep. Beep echoing from somewhere very far away. I know where I am. This is the boundary between life and death. Finally, this old, worn-out heart has exhausted itself after all these years of beating laborious rhythms. I am not afraid. If there is one thing I regret, it is the look full of hatred in Elias' eyes when the boy threw the wooden box into the trash can that day. But I don't blame him. I have never blamed my child. Suddenly, piercing through the dense fog, I hear a choked-up sound. Dad, I'm sorry. Please don't go. It's Elias. The boy's voice is trembling, shattered, completely different from the steely, arrogant tone of a CEO on the award podium. I feel a warm breath placed on the back of my rough hand. Tears. The tears of my son are falling on my hand. I went to that trailer. I opened the iron box. Elias sobbed, each word like he was cutting into his own heart. Why didn't you tell me about the scholarship fund? Why did you sell the house, sell even the garage that you loved the most to save my company? I called you trash. I am a bastard dad. Oh, Elias, my foolish boy. I want to raise my hand to pat his head, want to tell him, don't cry. That money means nothing. I just need you to fly high, untethered by my poverty, but I cannot move. My body feels locked beneath a 1,000-year-old layer of ice. I can only lie there, silently listening to my son being tortured by remorse, day after day. I don't know how many days have passed in that darkness. I feel Elias' stubbly beard when the boy rests his head on my hand. He hasn't left. He has abandoned his entire tech empire to stand guard beside a useless old man. Then one afternoon, I hear the hospital room door open. Heavy, familiar footsteps walk in. It's Ray, my closest old friend from the days working at the mechanic shop. "You've been here for 6 days, Elias. You should go home and get some sleep," Ray's hoarse voice rang out. "I can't, Uncle Ray. I don't deserve it. He gave me everything, yet I always hated him for not attending my wedding. I always thought he was cold-blooded when my mom died." "Enough," Ray suddenly snapped. I hear the choked sound in my old friend's throat. "I promised your father I would take this secret to the grave. But seeing you torture yourself, and seeing him lying here, I cannot stay silent anymore." In the darkness, my soul seems to scream, "No, Ray, don't tell. Please don't shatter the boy's perfect image of his mother." But Ray's voice still rang out, clear and agonizing. "You think your father is cold-blooded. You think your late mother was a saint. The day your mother died, people didn't just discover she was sick. She had secretly gotten involved in gambling and borrowed heavily from the underworld. A $200,000 debt, Elias. The debt collectors were planning to go to your university, planning to smash your perfect record and your bright future to extort the debt." I hear Elias step back, bumping into the bed frame, his breath hitching. "Your father didn't cry at the funeral because he didn't have the time to cry," Ray continued. "To save you, he stepped up to shoulder the entire debt. He had to sign a contract to work as a mechanic on an oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico. 6 grueling months at sea, working 16 hours a day, amidst chemicals and storms, to pay off the debt for the wife who had betrayed him. Your wedding. It fell exactly during the time he was stuck out at sea, in the middle of a tropical storm. Your father got down on his knees and begged the foreman for a helicopter ride to the shore, but they refused because it was too dangerous. I remember that night. The rain whipped stingingly against my face. I sat outside the rusty steel railing of the oil rig, in the middle of the pitch-black ocean, hugging the wedding photo Ray had emailed me, crying like a child. That night, your father sat in the middle of the sea, hugging your photo and crying. He chose to become the terrible guy in your eyes, just so you could keep your pride in your mother. He protected you from the shadows, Elias. A wailing cry, agonizing enough to tear one's guts out, echoed in the hospital room. Elias collapsed. The boy's cries brought down every last wall of pride. He cried for my ultimate sacrifice, cried for his own shallowness. The misunderstandings piled up for so long were stripped bare. I am in so much pain. I want to rip this fog apart to embrace my son, but I still cannot. I am sinking deeper. My heart rate begins to slow down. The darkness is swallowing me up. Perhaps it's time to let go, I thought to myself. All debts are paid. My son knows the truth. He will be fine. But the moment I was about to surrender to death, a small sound rang in my ear. Tick-whir, tick. It is the sound of metal scraping against each other. The sound of a mainspring being wound. The sound of tiny gears clicking into rhythm. I dug through the hotel's trash can. I got it back, Dad. Elias' voice sounded right next to my ear, soaked in tears. I recognized that sound. It is the old pocket watch that I personally polished every gear of to bring as a birthday gift to my son. The boy kept it. Do you remember? Elias whispered, his trembling voice taking me back in time to 20 years ago, when the boy was just 9 years old, sitting and sobbing because his toy car was broken. You taught me. As long as the gears align, anything broken can run again. We just need to patiently find their right places. I feel the cold glass face of the watch being placed into the palm of my hand. The tick-tock sounds rhythmically, transmitting through the flesh, running straight into my dying heartbeat. Your heart is also a machine, my greatest mechanic. Elias choked back a sob, gripping my hand tightly. Our gears are aligned again. I understand everything now. Please, please run again. Don't leave me alone. I need you. As long as the gears align, anything broken can run again. That saying was like a lightning bolt tearing through the thick fog. The image of the 9-year-old boy, smudged with grease, looking up at me and smiling appeared brilliantly. The ticking of the watch blended with the beep of the heart monitor, pulling me soaring up from the bottom of the abyssal black ocean. I gathered the last fading strength of a human life, channeling it into the fingers being held tightly by Elias. Softly, but decisively, I curled my finger, returning my son's squeeze. Elias' hiccuping sob suddenly rang out, and then I struggled to lift my heavy eyelashes. The glaring light of the recovery room crashed into my eyes. But more brilliant than that light was the haggard, tear-drenched face of my son looking at me, as if seeing a true miracle. Below is part 4 of the story. This part brings us back to Elias' perspective, focusing on the moment of healing right in the hospital room, the belated bursting tears, and the difficulty when a father who is always used to sacrificing must now learn how to receive love from his son. When Arthur's thin and wrinkled eyelashes slightly fluttered and then slowly opened, Elias felt as if someone had just removed a massive boulder that had been weighing down his chest for the past 6 days. The heart rate on the monitor, once as fragile as a thread, now began to beat in steadier and stronger rhythms, blending with the ticking of the pocket watch in their hands. "Dad," Elias exclaimed, his voice shattering. He didn't dare breathe heavily, afraid that this illusion would vanish. "Doctor. Where is the doctor?" When the on-call team rushed in to check the vital signs and declared Arthur had passed the critical stage, Elias finally allowed himself to collapse his head against the edge of the bed. The CEO, who always wore a cold armor of steel, the man who once made business rivals tremble in fear, was now sobbing like a lost child who had just found his home. After the doctors left, leaving behind a quiet space with only soft yellow light, Arthur slightly turned his head to look at his son. His cloudy eyes gleamed with pity. He tried to pull his hand back, but Elias gripped it tightly with both hands, pressing it firmly against his forehead. "Sorry for bothering you, Elias," Arthur whispered, his voice dry and full of guilt. "I had planned to just go, so you wouldn't have to worry anymore." "Don't say that, Dad," Elias snapped his head up, his red eyes brimming with tears. He looked deeply into the wrinkles, etching the hardship on his father's face. "I went to that trailer. I opened the iron box. Uncle Ray, he told me everything. About the scholarship fund, about the auto garage, and about Mom too." Hearing the word Mom, Arthur's body suddenly stiffened. Panic flashed at the bottom of the old father's eyes. "Ray. That blabbermouth old man, Elias. Don't listen to him. Your mother." "Why did you do that?" Elias yelled, the volume suppressed to the point where his throat burned. "Why did you let me hate you for 10 whole years? Why would you rather bear the reputation of a cold-blooded man who abandoned his family than tell me the truth that Mom left behind a pile of loan shark debt? Why did you let me curse you out in the middle of the hotel that day without fighting back at all?" Arthur was silent. He looked up at the stark white ceiling, breathing heavily. Finally he sighed, a sad smile blooming on his lips. "Because you needed an amazing mother in your memories to be proud of." "Elias," Arthur's voice deepened, brutally gentle. "You were only 18 then. You had a brilliant future ahead. you were accepted into Stanford. If you knew your mother was a gambling addict, if you knew the debt collectors were prowling, your wings would have been broken by an inferiority complex. You needed the belief that you came from a loving family, so you could have enough confidence to stand among the wealthy in Silicon Valley. Arthur struggled to lift the hand pierced with IV needles, gently touching Elias' tear-soaked cheek. The rough hands, calloused from motor oil and rust. "I am just a lowly mechanic's son," Arthur said, tears welling from the corners of his old eyes. "My hands were born to be smudged with mud and grease. As long as I was dirty, your hands would be clean. As long as I bore the darkness, you would be bathed in the light. Your reproaches, they didn't hurt as much as seeing you collapse. If the truth hurt you, then letting me bear it alone was enough." Elias bit his lip until it bled to hold back his sobs. He realized how ridiculous his arrogance had been all this time. He used to think he had climbed up from empty hands, but he never knew there was another pair of hands that had been crushed to pave the way for him. Arthur's silent strength had shielded him from all the storms of life. "I am a bastard." Elias buried his head into his father's chest. "I threw the watch you gave me into the trash. I humiliated you. I don't deserve what you've done. But you picked it back up, didn't you?" Arthur smiled, his eyes glancing at the pocket watch, lying peacefully on the blanket. "Just like you said. The gears have aligned again. Everything can start over." Over the following weeks, Elias' life was completely turned upside down, but in a way that he had never felt so peaceful. He canceled all his business trips, delegated the operations to the vice president, and refused to push forward the $100 million merger deal that was in its final stages. Investors called to curse him for being crazy, but Elias just quietly turned off his phone. Compared to reclaiming the years lost with his father, every tech empire became meaningless. The day Arthur was discharged from the hospital, Elias brought a brand new wheelchair. Arthur frowned at the Porsche parked outside the hospital door, hesitating to get in. "I can go back to the trailer park now, Elias. I can take care of myself. Just go back to your company. Don't let people laugh at you for having a messy old man bothering you," Arthur said stubbornly, his nature of not wanting to be a burden to anyone acting up again. Elias didn't argue. He just quietly opened the car door, lifted his feather-light, frail father, placed him in the passenger seat, and carefully buckled his seat belt. "That trailer lot has been returned. I've taken all of your clothes," Elias said while starting the engine, his tone resolute but his eyes extremely warm. "Today, you're going home with me. My apartment has 3 bedrooms, but it has never felt like a family. It's time we fix that house, my mechanic." Arthur looked out the window, stealthily wiping away a tear rolling down his cheek. The car rolled under the Chicago sunset, taking both of them away from the dark misunderstandings of the past, moving towards a new beginning. But Elias knew, bringing his father to live with him would not be easy. How would a man who had been used to poverty and sacrifice for 30 years get used to his son's lavish world? The collision between those two worlds would certainly still have many things to untangle. Below is part 5 of the story. This part dives deep into the psychological clash when the father and son start living together, portraying a very realistic pain. A father who has been used to sacrificing his whole life now doesn't know how to enjoy happiness and receive care. The penthouse on the 42nd floor of Elias' building was a completely alien world to Arthur Vance. This place had floor-to-ceiling glass windows, overlooking the panoramic Chicago skyline, an automated sensor lighting system that turned on with every footstep, and a king-size bed spread with silk sheets. For a tech CEO like Elias, that was a basic living standard. But for a man who had spent 30 years sleeping on sagging foam mattresses and listening to rats scurrying on a tin roof, this luxury felt like a stifling glass cage. The first few days of living with his son, Arthur behaved no differently than a lodging guest in debt. Elias heartbreakingly noticed his father's habits. During meals, Arthur only picked at the edges, leaving all the best cuts of meat for Elias, exactly like the old days when the house didn't have enough food. When Elias bought him expensive cashmere wool sweaters, Arthur neatly folded them and tucked them deep in the corner of the closet, adamantly wearing his frayed collar flannel shirts. He even always tiptoed, trying not to make any noise, as if afraid his existence would scratch the polished oak floors. But what tormented Elias the most was his father's eyes. It was the look of someone who always felt useless. For a lifetime, Arthur was used to draining his sweat to create value, and now stripped of his work, having to let his son pamper him, he felt he was a massive burden. On a Saturday morning, Elias had an urgent online meeting with the board of directors that lasted 2 hours. He had told the maid to prepare breakfast for Arthur before going into his office and closing the door. When the meeting ended, Elias stepped out, planning to invite his father for a walk in the park. But as he approached the kitchen area, a scene made him freeze. Elias' imported Italian espresso machine, worth over $10,000, had been taken apart. The gleaming components were scattered across the marble countertop, and Arthur, with a compact repair toolkit, which he had begged Elias to let him bring from the trailer park, was meticulously turning screws. His old, trembling hand slipped from the screwdriver handle. Screech! The sharp metal tip slashed a long scratch across the sleek steel casing of the expensive machine, simultaneously cutting a bloody streak on Arthur's thumb. "What are you doing?" Elias startled, stepping forward quickly. Arthur jolted like a child caught, red-handed breaking something. He hastily hid his bleeding hand behind his back, his face turning pale with panic. I'm sorry, Elias," Arthur stammered, his voice trembling with guilt. "This morning I heard the coffee machine making very strange, whirring noises. Exactly like the sound of an engine with a loose valve. I thought I could fix it. I just wanted to help you a bit. I didn't mean to scratch it. Just deduct it from, no, I'll find a way to compensate you for this machine." Arthur's apology was like a sharp knife stabbing straight into Elias' heart. Seeing his frail old father, newly recovered from heart disease, bowing his head begging for forgiveness, just for scratching an inanimate machine, Elias felt his eyes blur. He didn't feel angry. He only felt hatred for his own self in the past. Had his cruelty and coldness over the last 10 years been etched so deeply into Arthur's subconscious that he always assumed this son would go crazy over the smallest mistakes? Elias took a deep breath, trying to suppress a sob. He gently pushed the pile of expensive components aside, stepping forward to grab Arthur's hand that was hidden behind his back. The cut wasn't deep, but blood was oozing out. "Elias, don't," Arthur tried to pull his hand back, afraid the dirty blood would soil his son's designer sweater. "Dad," Elias called, his voice deep and steady. He pulled out a tissue, carefully pressing it against his father's wound. "Look at me." Arthur hesitantly looked up. He had mentally prepared to hear a tirade about his inability to use high-tech appliances, about being a destructive country bumpkin. But there was no rage in Elias' eyes, only a profound lake full of love and sorrow. "This machine costs $15,000, Elias spoke slowly. Arthur's shoulders hunched, his lips trembling. $15,000. That was equal to his food budget for an entire year previously. "But to me," Elias continued, "it is just a pile of scrap metal compared to a single drop of your blood. You don't have to compensate for anything. You don't have to fix anything. This is your house. You have the right to smash this machine to pieces if you want, and I will personally go buy a new one for you to smash again tomorrow." Arthur was stunned. His old eyes blinked repeatedly. But I am here, eating your food, spending your money. I can't do anything useful. I feel like an invalid Elias. Back at the garage, at least I could still fix cars. Elias pulled his father into a tight embrace. Arthur's bony shoulders were swallowed up in his son's broad arms. Listen to me, my great mechanic, Elias whispered into his father's ear, his voice choking with emotion. You have worked grueling hours your whole life. You sold your blood, sold your sweat, sold even your dreams and dignity to build the company I own today. You prepaid every expense for this house a long time ago. He stepped back, looking straight into his tearful father's eyes. Your only duty now is not fixing machines. Your duty is to learn how to rest, learn how to let others serve you, and learn how to allow your son to take care of you. Can you do that for me? Arthur pressed his lips tightly together. The final defensive walls of a poor laborer's self-esteem completely collapsed. He nodded, hot tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks, falling onto Elias' expensive shirt. But this time, he didn't try to wipe them away anymore. For the first time in 30 years of shouldering every storm, Arthur Vance allowed himself to lean on someone else, allowed himself to be weak. That morning, the father and son did not clean up the mess of scattered components. Elias bandaged his father's finger, then pulled out 2 boxes of microwavable spaghetti from the fridge, a cheap meal, but the most delicious thing Arthur had eaten in many years. They sat next to each other on the kitchen floor, eating while listening to Elias talk about his troubles at the company, things he previously always thought Dad will never understand. And Arthur just sat there, smiling and nodding. He realized that sometimes the greatest help a father can give his adult child is simply to sit there, listen, and exist peacefully in their life. Below is part 6 of the story. This time, the event brings us back to the starting line, a stage illuminated by brilliant lights. But instead of an arrogant severance like in part 1, this will be a turning the tables moment, where the truth is exposed and love triumphs over the proud ego. 6 months passed since the day Arthur moved in with his son. The warm spring had dispelled the bitter cold of the Chicago winter and simultaneously melted the final layers of ice in the relationship between the father and son. Arthur gradually got used to his new life. He no longer tried to secretly fix the expensive electronics in the house, but instead, he spent his time taking care of the hydroponic garden on the balcony and cooking cozy dinners, waiting for Elias to come home from work. His heart rate became more stable, his wrinkles relaxed, and his smiles appeared more frequently too. For Elias, rejecting the massive merger deal did not cause his empire to collapse as the investors had threatened. On the contrary, it opened up a new, more autonomous path for him. Tonight was the launch night of the company's new artificial intelligence software product line, a highly anticipated event by the Silicon Valley media and the financial world. Inside the backstage of the McCormick Place Convention Center, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The company's PR director, Sarah, was hastily reviewing Elias' speech script. Elias, are you sure you want to change the speech at the last minute? Sarah asked worriedly. The media is craving your self-made lone wolf image. The story of you rising from the slums without anyone's help is a magnet attracting the press. Bringing your personal story about your father into it at this moment might dilute the business message. Elias was retightening his tie. He stopped, turning to look at Sarah with sharp yet calm eyes. That self-made story is a lie, Sarah. And I'm sick and tired of living in lies, Elias replied resolutely, then turned and walked towards the VIP lounge. Inside the lounge, Arthur was sitting stiffly on the velvet-upholstered sofa. He was wearing a well-tailored Tom Ford suit, his silver-streaked hair carefully styled. But his expression was full of restlessness, his rough hands tightly intertwined, constantly wringing the hem of his jacket. Seeing Elias walk in, Arthur hurriedly stood up, his breath catching. "Elias, I think I'd better take a taxi home. Out there it's all billionaires, investors, educated people. I'm just a mechanic. What if I do something wrong, or people ask me about technology? I'll make you lose face." Elias stepped forward, gently placing his hand on his father's trembling shoulder. He understood his father's complex. 30 years of living in darkness and society's disdain couldn't be erased in just a few months. "Listen to me, Dad." Elias smiled, his voice warm and deep. "Out there are thousands of people wearing silk suits and wearing tens of thousands of dollars watches, but not a single one of them can manually machine the gears of an old pocket watch, and none of them would dare to sell away their entire life to save my company." He grasped Arthur's calloused hand. "Tonight, I don't need a tech expert. I need my dad. I want them to see the greatest man I have ever known." Arthur looked into his son's resolute eyes, and his fears gradually dissipated. He nodded, taking a deep breath. 15 minutes later, the vast, packed auditorium burst into applause when Elias Vance walked out onto the stage. Camera flashes blinked continuously, exactly like that night at the Ritz-Carlton a year ago. But this time, Elias was not walking alone. He slowed his pace, matching the somewhat limping steps of an older man. The entire auditorium murmured, the camera lenses all focused on the strange man, who was being personally escorted to the center of the stage by the young CEO. Elias helped Arthur sit down on the chair of honor, right in the center of the brightest spotlight, before stepping to the microphone. "Good evening," Elias began, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "A year ago, at an awards ceremony not far from here, I stood on a similar stage and told the world, I am a man who rose from empty hands. I said that I walked alone without anyone to catch me, and all my success was thanks to my resilient loneliness." Elias paused a beat, sweeping his eyes over the thousands of spectators listening in silence. "I was wrong," Elias spoke loudly, his voice beginning to choke, but full of decisiveness. "I was arrogant and I lied. The truth is, no one in this world can achieve great things on their own without someone silently bearing the storms for them." The auditorium fell into absolute silence. Everyone could feel the atmosphere shifting. 6 years ago, my company was on the brink of bankruptcy. I received an anonymous angel investment worth $150,000 to salvage everything. For years, I thought it was some tycoon who saw my potential. But I was wrong. Elias turned around, looking towards Arthur. The old father's eyes were already glistening with tears. "My angel investor didn't wear designer clothes, didn't work on Wall Street. My investor worked 16 hours a day in an auto garage reeking of grease, and then on an offshore rig in the middle of Pacific storms. He sold the family's only home, sold his life's entire livelihood to scrape together every spare cent to save my dream. Not only that, he shouldered massive debts, endured the cruelest insults from his own son, just to protect a perfect record and a pure belief for that child." Many in the audience began taking out handkerchiefs to dab their tears. Cameras clicked continuously, capturing the historical moment of the tech world. Elias stepped away from the podium, walked over and took one knee in front of Arthur right in the middle of the stage, taking his rough hand and raising it high. "Today, we launch a system connecting the most complex data, but the greatest connection string I have ever learned does not come from algorithms, but comes from old gears and unconditional love." Elias stood up, tightly embracing his sobbing father, then turned towards the microphone. "Please allow me to formally introduce to all of you the foundation of everything I have, and the greatest investor of my life, my father, Mr. Arthur Vance." Thousands of people in the auditorium stood up simultaneously. Not a polite round of applause, but an explosive, endless ovation. Arthur Vance, the sullen mechanic who once hid himself in a dilapidated trailer lot, was now standing in the most brilliant light, receiving the respect of the entire world that his son belonged to. Every misunderstanding was finally incinerated under the light of truth. A second chance is not just about forgiveness, but the courage to bring your unsung hero out of the darkness and proudly tell the whole world, "I am his son." Below is part 7, also the epilogue closing the story. This part will let the emotions settle, facing the cruel rule of time, but not in regret, but rather the fulfillment of a second chance that was made the most of. 2 years after the historic Night of Honor at McCormick Place, Elias Vance's life took a completely different trajectory. The media storm praising him as the humanitarian leader of Silicon Valley eventually passed, making way for the quiet core values he had reclaimed. Elias was no longer the workaholic CEO, pulling all-nighters at the office and using arrogance to mask his loneliness. The once cold penthouse had truly become a warm nest. Arthur's hydroponic plants thrived on the balcony, and in the corner of the living room, a wooden cradle built by Arthur's own hands swayed gently. Elias had married Sarah, the PR director who stood by his side through the ups and downs, and they had just welcomed a chubby baby girl, little Lily. A weekend afternoon, pale yellow sunlight streamed through the glass windows. Elias leaned against the door, smiling at the scene before him. Arthur, whose hair was now completely white, sat on the armchair, carefully holding the little being in his arms. The rough hands full of scars from metal cuts of the past were now caressing his granddaughter's soft cheeks with extreme tenderness, as if he were touching the most precious treasure on earth. "Look at her, Elias," Arthur whispered, a gentle smile brightening his wrinkled face. "Her eyes look exactly like yours when you were born, stubborn and full of curiosity." Elias stepped forward, sitting down on the wool rug by his father's feet, resting his head against his knee like a child. "She will grow up and know that she has the greatest grandfather in the world," Elias said softly. However, behind that peaceful scene was an hourglass running out of sand. The myocardial infarction 2 years ago had permanently destroyed a part of Arthur's heart muscle. The best specialists Elias hired also had to shake their heads, saying his life expectancy now could only be counted in months, even days. That old heart had overworked itself for 3 decades, and now it wanted to rest. Elias knew that. Arthur also knew that. But there was no despair or fear in this house, because they had not wasted their second chance. No words were choked back, no hugs were refused, and no misunderstandings were left hanging. That night, after Lily was sound asleep, Elias stepped out onto the balcony. Arthur was sitting there, covered by a thin blanket, holding the old pocket watch in his hands. The tick-tock, tick-tock sound echoed steadily in the quiet Chicago night. Seeing Elias, Arthur gently waved him over. He placed the watch into his son's palm, then slowly folded Elias' fingers over it. "I have kept it all this time to make sure the gears run in the right rhythm," Arthur said, his voice very small, his breathing somewhat labored. "Now, it belongs to you." "Dad," Elias choked up, his throat dry. He knew what the moment of passing on this keepsake meant. "Don't cry, Elias," Arthur smiled, his eyes incredibly serene. "I have lived a fulfilling life. I saved your company. I saw you become a brave man, knowing how to admit your faults and how to love. I got to hold my granddaughter. For a lowly mechanic, that is more than enough for one lifetime." Elias gripped the watch tightly, pressing it to his chest, trying to hold back the tears that were about to overflow. "I love you, Dad," Elias uttered, clear and strong. "Thank you for everything you endured for me. Thank you for waiting for me to grow up." Arthur closed his eyes, a contented smile lingering on his lips. I love you too, Elias. Take good care of Sarah and little Lily. Be a wonderful father, just the way you are doing." That was their last conversation. At dawn the next morning, Arthur Vance fell into a deep sleep and never woke up again. His heart stopped beating, but not in loneliness on a freezing oil rig or in a poor trailer, but in a warm room, surrounded by his family's boundless love. Arthur's funeral was held simply at a small suburban cemetery, exactly according to his wishes. There was no press, no flashy eulogies, just Elias, Sarah, little Lily, Uncle Ray, and the old mechanics who used to work with him. When lowering the casket, Elias didn't collapse or wail like the day his mother died. He stood there sturdy, one arm around his wife, the other hand in his pocket, his thumb gently rubbing against the glass face of the pocket watch. He had no regrets, because he knew he had managed to say all the words of love he needed to say while his father was still alive. The final lesson. Life is a cruel time machine, always moving forward and never allowing us to go back. We often let our proud egos, our busyness, and misunderstandings blur the bigger picture of our family's silent sacrifices. Don't wait until your loved ones are lying on a hospital bed to start finding out the truth. Don't wait until the rusty iron box is pried open to realize your parents' sweat and tears. And above all, don't expect a second chance as an obvious miracle. Open your heart, understand, and speak words of love today, right in this moment, before the ticking sound of time stops forever.